From NYU Center for Multicultural Education and Programs, this is Unpack That. I'm your host, Kemi Mogo. Welcome back. If you've listened to previous episodes, then you know we've been away for a while, but we're back with a whole new season, and we're so glad that you're here. This episode is all about the concept of liberation. The word is on our minds because CMEP's theme for the year is Liberatory Futures. Liberatory Futures is informing our programming, the content, the topics, and the speakers we invite. It has also inspired a mural painted by a local team of queer artists led by Jess X. Snow, and it's located at the entrance of this office. It's titled Our Collective Visions of Liberation. As you'll hear in the following episode, the concept of liberation is deeply personal, and we don't have a conclusive definition for it. But to give you a hint, here is the text that is part of the mural written by CMEP staff member Sooah Kwak, who we'll hear from in this episode. The text reads, "How could our lives be different if we spent more time and energy radically imagining, boldly creating, and unapologetically embodying our collective visions of liberation?" Be sure to stop by and experience the mural for yourself. In the meantime, I talked with 3 people about what this all means to them. Stay with us as we unpack liberation. First up is Zoraida, who discussed what liberation has to do with beauty, self-love, and representation.
I'm Zoraida Ingles, and I do freelance content creation as well as production design. For content creation, I mostly work in the beauty space, and so to be able to see liberation in that field, I guess I would like to see a lot more diversity and inclusion, not specifically just for like skin tones, but also probably to dismantle like what the standard for beauty is, and bringing out like, I don't know, like I want to see more curvy bodies in people, and I want to see like more like just not white people and not like skinny East Asian women. I want to see many people with like different skin types, and I want to see like before and afters, and I want to hear about their like healing journeys of how they came to visually like love themselves, because I think like being able to have self-love is part of like liberation and personal liberation, especially for the beauty field. But I was also trained as a designer, like a visual graphic product designer, and so I think in order to have liberation in that field too, it's more about identifying different groups of people instead of staying to what is considered popular, I guess. I always tried to like make products specifically for marginalized people and to help other people like figure out what those groups specifically need, just to like move privilege onto other groups and help them elevate their status of living. And in terms of like personal liberation, I guess I would just like to see people joyously celebrating themselves in groups of each other, like feeling like they belong and not like they're isolated or just like not having a seat at the table, and just seeing a lot of like joy in that space instead of like giving so much energy to like negativity and bad feelings and all that, which is like I totally get that exists and that's like part of human nature, but I just want to be able to see more examples and more representations of what joy looks like in other bodies.
I'm wondering, just because it kind of, I heard it when you were speaking, the difference between defining liberation by what it isn't and what it is. have you always thought about it the way you do now? Or I know sometimes people get stuck on saying, I don't want that,
Yeah.
without envisioning what we actually do want.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering how your thinking about that has changed over time, or if it's always been what it is now.
I think it's definitely changed, mostly because I've gone to therapy, and through therapy I've learned that there is this thing called exposure therapy, and so if you just expose yourself to many new things, that just kind of removes the fear surrounding the unknown, and for me that gives me a lot more confidence to pursue the things that I want instead of just focusing on the things that I don't want, because that list can be endless, but I think there's a lot more energy and a lot more positivity going into figuring out the things that I do want and going after that.
Next up is Natalie, who's discussing what liberation has to do with what she's studying here at NYU.
My name is Natalie Asalgado. I'm a graduate student here at the Silver School of Social Work, and so I have an internship at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, and I work here at the Center for Multicultural Education and Programs.
Has your associations with liberation, just the concept, changed over time? Like,
I don't think I ever really thought about liberation until I started working here.
okay.
It's not something that has come up in like social justice conversations for me. I think like in my undergrad we were also focused on like what is wrong and like how to change that, but like didn't necessarily reimagine a world where liberation was possible. We were very focused on working within the system. Not necessarily that liberation is about working outside of it, but I think our thoughts were just like constrained by our current situations. I'm learning about the history of social work and now like a budding clinician of color, and it's really hard because we literally make our money off the backs of people who need services and resources. Like, without poverty, without oppression, social workers are unemployed. But I think that is the goal. It's just really a really hard and slow process. And I like think about like what if we didn't need all these resources and support systems. Not to say that the ones that exist are adequate, because I think we could do a lot better. But then it's also scary because I am in this field and I'm like, well, in all this debt, what do I do without this?
Yeah.
I have a very complicated relationship with social work. But I always try to remind myself that it is fundamentally about our clients and like what do they think that they need rather than what I may think or my colleagues may think that they need.
Could you talk a little bit more about this tension between working quote unquote within the system versus outside the system and what that has to do with liberation? I know sometimes people compare social justice and liberation in that way, like social justice is working within the system and liberation ideally is more radical than that, where it's not so much about equity, but actually dismantling the things that are keeping people oppressed.
Yeah.
How do you understand all of that?
I just immediately keep thinking about the image of the baseball field, like the person with like the people with like one crate each, and then when you give them the amount of crates they need versus just ripping down the whole fence. And I think that last image is just really powerful. Because I think it's, at the end of the day, it has to be a mixture of both. Liberation, like you have to have people working from within and people working from outside. But then there is that tension at the end of the day where like, well, if you completely get rid of the system that exists, then what do we do? But so I think we need to take a step forward and also envision like what that future looks like without the fence, for example. So I think a lot about like my internship is at an agency right now versus people are doing community organizing for their internship. And so I think of like myself like working within the system, like how we define mental health and mental health care, versus community organizing is usually like, this is what needs to change and this is how we want it to change. So it's a little bit of both, like the micro, the individual work, and the macro, like the community level wide scale work.
What about personal liberation? What does that look like for you?
I think
you can take your time to think too.
Well, my instinct is it needs to be about feeling safe and comfortable in like the spaces that I inhabit. At the same time, it's also not about safety and comfort, right? Because there's something really special about learning through your own discomfort, which I think that I've really learned over the past few years, both through like my work, my education, just like personal, like friends and family. And so I think that liberation is likely just knowing that the people you care about you too, and are all looking out for one another, rather than in a kind of cutthroat, like capitalistic way, like I need to make it, therefore I need to step on you.
Yeah, so community interdependence is important.
Okay. I think it just, once you think about the systems that we do have in place, it feels kind of silly and arbitrary. Like if you think about like banks, for example, why do you give your money to people to hold it for you and hope that they give it back when you need it?
I was about to bring up another podcast. I never understood the housing crisis and the recession and everything until I listened to, well, actually, first I watched The Big Short, which is a movie based on a nonfiction book about the recession. And This American Life did a bunch of episodes about toxic assets and banks and like the too big to fail thing. It is kind of arbitrary how we just like chose this system, or rather the people with power at that time chose a certain system and then maintained it over like hundreds of years. And now we're like, like a bank can charge you for not having enough money in your account. What?
We
wild.
Criminalize poverty every day.
Yeah, so on the one hand, it's hard to imagine what the other thing could be. But on the other hand, it's kind of hopeful because it's not like the way it is inherent to humanity. It doesn't have to be that way. So
I think that we just need to give people back their agency.
Yeah. I love that. Let's do it.
Right now.
Right now. And go.